Good evening, everybody. I just had an article come to my attention, and I thought I would spend a little bit of this Friday giving you my thoughts about real estate. So about an hour or so ago, my significant other forwarded me an article that was forwarded to him from a friend. It was in the New York Times, and it was discussing changes to the real estate industry. And again, this is the first house that I ever bought, and I haven't ever sold a house yet. So, I'm still trying to sort of figure all this stuff out. And clearly, like the real estate commissions for the realtors, that's how they make their living, are significant or a significant amount of money. So evidently there was a lawsuit brought against the National Association of Realtors, who essentially they would sort of set the fees that would be charged by realtors. Both, I guess the way it works is that the seller pays the fees and that the seller agent shares with the agent representing the buyers, and then they split the fees, and that's how they make their income. And it's not a tiny amount of money. And so there's part of me, I'm sure he was sending it because he's like, look, changes are underway, sort of with this idea of like free market in real estate commissions may be rolling out, and we would not pay as much money, which at this point for him, I think it's mostly about the amount of money that's involved. But I realize that it's about automation and changes that are coming to the real estate industry connected to prop tech, or the technology of property management. And this is something that I talked a lot about with a variety of people in the series that we did around Flow, and Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen's new venture, After We Work. And, in some ways it relates a little bit to the, you'll own nothing and be happy. But I would say that that's kind of a mind virus that has been set up to really limit people's understanding, because then they glom onto that. They go, oh, look, this development in real estate. What it says is essentially they're sort of deregulating, and they're saying that there's not going to be a set 6% commission anymore. And this is like evidently $100 billion a year. So it's not small change. This is in the United States. And so it's going to shake everything up. It's going to be like the biggest change to I don't know if this is also commercial real estate or just residential real estate, but huge shakeups are coming to the industry again. And on the one hand, it seems like maybe the National Association of Realtors is the outlier, but clearly they would need to be in on this restructuring, right? That this is going to happen, because in the end, the future seems to be, with everything coordinated by big data and signals, that everything needs to be contingent and everything needs to be subscription based. So yes, I mean, the goal is that you won't own things, because if you don't own things, then you can be, I mean, they're going to say that it's about the circular economy and being green and sustainable and resilient. And while like there are definitely some aspects to that, like it'd be nice to have access to a tools sharing program so we didn't have to store power tools all the time, and we could just each of us take turns when we need it. It's not like I want to share my sweater, like I don't really want all of that. Like I'm fine to like go to a thrift shop and get a used thing if I want to, but I don't want my clothing to be a subscription model, like, or my underwear. That's like not appealing. But if we stop at that and we don't understand that actually architecture, and I've talked about this last couple things about culture and about social artifacts that pardon me, that the environments in which we live, and my background was historic preservation, so the scale and the nature and the materials and the density or lack of density shapes how we relate to one another. And if we are using the lens that how we relate to one another is part of a biohybrid quantum computation, potentially interdimensional computation, then the architecture is super important. And it's not just about maybe punishing you or controlling you. It's actually about swarm intelligence and stigmergy and pheromones. And so the architecture in which you live and the material culture within the architecture and the built environment, like the plazas and the sidewalks and the streets, that's all part of this networked computing system. I mean, what I'm saying is I think we should incorporate the idea that this could be part of the larger computation structure. So architecture is super important, and they've got this guy, Adam Newman, who's essentially been written off as like some idiot, right? Fraudster idiot, going off and setting it all up. And he's now sort of retrenched into Miami, which is the blockchain Web3 center, right? Not just for the US, but sort of the launching pad for Central and South America, and, setting up his programs. So again, just to reiterate, there's this New York Times article. I guess supposedly it's sort of a buzz within the real estate community today. This idea that commissions are going to be, again, it's sort of like a free market, right? And so all the libertarians, I'm sure, will be like, great, there's a free market now. We can charge, different things. We have to provide good services, not just expected, right? It's not just something that you can expect to pay the 6% or split the 6%. It's going to be something different. It's going to be something, literally, the article talked about, like, imagine the creative solutions, right, that are going to come out of this. And I would say most average realtors who just do their business in like selling tract housing or selling corporate real estate, office space, or selling those things, they're really good at their jobs, which is knowing their markets. Most of them are probably not looking at the games within the games within the games. They know the game of their local real estate market and how to play that. And if they're a successful realtor, they do it well. But they're not incentivized to look up and consider that the game that they're playing is actually one game within a larger nested set of games. And that this larger nested set of games may involve the shift to sustainable, resilient cities and smart city computation and new models of occupancy, new models of the built environment in which we live that involve tracking signals and choice architecture. And so what I would also suggest is that if they're generating $100 billion in commission a year in the real estate industry, and as someone who's been, again, online, trying to imagine what this new phase of my life is going to look like, where it's going to be, there's a lot of choice involved, right? So there are many choices along the road, like that. I made a choice to not stay in Philadelphia. Okay, so that's a choice. One of those choices involved taxes, the property taxes. What we bought our house for in the late 90s, it's so much higher now. And I'm not going to be able to afford the taxes. A lot of people aren't going to be able to afford their taxes as things go more and more expensive, more and more luxury. So I have to retrench. So then you choose, okay, so where next, right? Well, then you survey the landscape. And I'm like, okay, Arkansas. Okay, so that's a choice. And then I'm like, okay, so Arkansas. So I have a bunch of pins in houses since I don't have a kid and I don't have who's, a minor child, and I don't need to worry about school districts. And I'm pretty open to what the options are. I have pins in maybe 6 or 7 different towns, right? And so that choice hasn't been made. And then some of that choice depends on which homes I'm looking at, right? And so where am I looking at them? I'm looking at them on property platforms, right? And this technology. This is moving towards automation. So I don't know like how long Zillow has been doing the Zillow thing, right? I never really expected, I figured we would pay off our house, our 30-year mortgage, and then stay until I went to the home. So I wasn't really paying much attention to property technology. But I do know that there was an acquaintance that I had who lived in a very exclusive neighborhood in a very expensive part of the country. And there was sort of a semi-abandoned house on the block in this very nice neighborhood. It was an aberration. And eventually it came to the point that this semi-abandoned house came up for sale, right? And it would go on all these platforms, right? Because it's all digital, right? It's all automated now. And then within short order, even though it was a pretty high price tag, in my opinion, I mean, maybe not for this metro area, which is very, very pricey, but someone from the other side of the country snatched up this property and then immediately started to hire someone local to rehab it into a multi-unit short-term rental lease, like Airbnb kind of thing, without the proper permits. And this area was very highly regulated about that. So then they're going up against that. But this was all enabled literally by platform technology. And so as we've been trying to navigate getting our house listed, back when I was involved, when my child was small and we had just moved here, I was part of the civic association, and some of the civic association people were realtors, and there were maybe three, we're a dense urban neighborhood, and there were maybe three different real estate offices, and you knew who the realtors were, and they knew the neighborhood. They were the neighborhood realtors. Like, you could count them on a couple hands who the realtors were that would sell houses in the neighborhood. And again, a lot of these houses, you know, I'm a newbie to Fairmount since I've only lived here since 1998, because a lot of these homes are actually intergenerational. People live here forever, right? It was that kind of place. So I'm thinking, okay, I had this one exchange, and it was clear that the person didn't really know the neighborhood that I'm in very well. And it's in my opinion, for people who like the city, and not everybody does, but for people who like a city place, it's a very lovely community because it's near the park. It has good bus routes downtown, and then you can bike, and we have little local shops. I mean, it's not super posh, but it's a very functional neighborhood, very walkable. And there's not much inventory. So I figured, how hard is it for a real estate agent to come up with a reasonable price to sell this house? But it was kind of clear this first real estate agent didn't really know much about the neighborhood. So I thought, well, okay, so maybe I need to find the local people again, right? And then I realized there was we're not in that world anymore. Like, we're just not in that world. And the reason that the world has changed is because of property platforms, which on the opposite side, it's enabled me to doom scroll Zillow and scout out and put pinpoints in 6 or 7 towns in Arkansas that I think I might be interested in houses in. So that's the upside for me. But the downside is this digitization of the automation. Like, this is in full force, right? And we know that what's going to be attached to the real estate ultimately is going to be blockchain, right? And we've seen some weird things with people selling NFTs of their houses, and I don't really understand how all of that works. But the idea of securitizing or putting capital and then putting things on blockchain, I remember talking with Leo a while back, and he was much more familiar with MakerDAO and this idea of using things as leveraged equity. So that's coming, right? And that's something I would hazard a guess that most of today's real estate agents are not. I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in real estate, if the accreditation or licensing things are giving you classes on blockchaining property. But it's clear that that's where it's going to go, is things are going to go on distributed ledgers. And then there are going to be new kinds of loans and securitizations and equity and all of these things linked to tokenization. And that's what's going to be. So, and the other thing I will just say in terms of data and choice architecture, so you think about the hive mind and all of this, is just out in the open, right? So you list a property, and then Zillow is just one of many online things, right? And a lot of these are houses, I guess, evidently now they don't, they use CAD, and they drop fake furniture in these houses. And sometimes you can really tell that that's not real. If you went to an open house at that house, that furniture wouldn't be in the room. But there's still a few. Most of the ones in Arkansas are occupied. The ones in Philadelphia seem to all have the same kind of mid-century modern furniture. They don't look like people's homes. And it makes me actually really stressed, because I love our house, but my house is an 1885 house, right? And we've kept it up pretty well, but it needs help. It's not perfect. And so you look on Zillow, you look on these doom scrolling real estate places, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, all these houses are perfect. But then you realize later, so it was a beautiful day, and I'm like, there's not much inventory in my neighborhood. I'm just going to walk around and see them, just go and see. And the thing about my neighborhood is the houses are all different sizes. There's 800 square foot 2-story houses, and then it scales up to 3,300 big old house. That's super big for Fairmount, which is where I live. And then everything in between, a lot around 1,200 square feet, for a little bit. So I'm walking around looking, and I have a list, I've written down this list of all the addresses from Zillow, and I'm looking. Almost half of them, they don't have a sign. There's no sign to tell you that it's for sale. Now, they'll tell you in our neighborhood, actually, a lot of people move up. You'll graduate, get your first couple jobs, build up some equity, and then buy a starter house, which is the 800,000 square foot house. And then you get married, you have a kid or two, and then you need a bigger house, right? And so then you hope to move up to a 3-story house, which is more like 1,500, 1,800 square feet, that sort of thing. But people like the neighborhood, so they want to stay, assuming they don't leave when their kid is school age. So wouldn't you think that you would have a big sign out front saying like house for sale, so that even someone who maybe, if they knew that the right house was on the market, but they weren't actively looking, if they were walking their dog and they saw that this house, then they would know. Or maybe they're walking their dog and they really want their sister to move in the neighborhood, so then they tell their sister to go look at the thing. But it was shocking to me that half of the ones weren't even advertising, right? But they weren't also moving. It's not like they're moving like in 2 weeks or anything. So why wouldn't they have a sign up? But it's a different signal. We're living in a digital world. So the signal isn't, I'm physically walking down the sidewalk and going to the store and I see a for sale sign. And then I get on the phone and I call my friend or I send them an email. It's, we're on a platform, and all of that is information that's being gathered, right? And so it seems to me, so this is where I'm getting back to the house, like I've been downsizing, right? And I've been clearing down to the things that I most absolutely want to pay to move, halfway across the country. But my stuff is still an occupied house, like, so you can see my chair, right? Like, so if a photographer comes in and they take pictures of my house, who forever and ever, it's out in the internet. Cause I've looked at the ones I looked at all the ones that sold last year, and I made a whole spreadsheet and I did my homework. And the houses that were people's houses, like I could see what sofa they had. How long is it out there? Forever, right? So for the next however long the internet lasts, like people are gonna say like, oh, that woman that lived at that house, her bed had that quilt on it. Like, or you could judge people's taste or whatever. And it's kind of strange to think about, like, it's just out in the public. Like once you decide to put your house for sale, it's not just between you and the people who come in with a realtor, it's you and the whole wide world. Like, once if I choose to share my address, like you can go on and you can tour around my house and forever and ever and ever. And that's weird. I mean, that's kind of, it feels a little invasive actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I hadn't really thought about it before today. So we've got all of these technology and data points and choice architectures. And in my opinion, all of this architecture is being fitted into socio-technical systems, and ultimately moves towards smart housing, which we have a very dumb house. In fact, at this point, like the internet is about the only smart thing I have in my house. But as we move more to stack and pack, so I live on the border. So I live in Fairmount. And there was a hard stop because the northern border of my neighborhood is Girard College, which was essentially an orphanage set up by the estate of Stephen Girard, who was a French merchant and coal multimillionaire. He was like the Bill Gates of his day, and he didn't have any kids. And so he created this walled compound orphanage, and it still exists. And it's at the end of my block. So Girard College is the hard stop for Fairmount. And then it starts to be Brewery Town. Now that hard line was a red line during the civil rights era. And so people in north of us, many of whom were Black homeowners who owned their homes, couldn't get loans, right? And we have old houses, especially the houses further north, they're fancier. Like mine is just a plain brick box, but those had turrets and gambrels and fancy things, and they're made out of tin. And after like 80 years, they need investment, right? And those poor families couldn't get loans because the banks would just redline them and push them out. And so eventually all of those houses rotted out, like not all of them, but many of them rotted out. They got torn down by John Street in clearance and urban renewal. And now the switch is flipped for stack and pack housing. So these open fields, some of them were houses and some of them were like grocery stores that were torn down just north of me. They're like hundreds and hundreds of units of apartments. Now they're really just thrown up, most of them. They're not like, my house is this little sturdy little brick box, and it has its like issues here and there, but it's going to be around, assuming like, the next person keeps a good roof on it. But these manufactured modular things, I don't know, but it's definitely going to be very, very dense. So what was I saying? I guess that's a lot more smart housing. So again, talking about Okay, so I talked about like the disruption, these creative solutions. Again, they're going to be posed as free market solutions, but I think they have a lot to do with automating the real estate industry and moving towards Web3 property. And yes, the own nothing and be happy circular economy, subscription rentier based economy where you've got Blackstone out there and they're renting, holding on to all of these rentals, and then they can make conditions on your renewals and maybe require certain health statuses depending on that. Like that's definitely how it's going to go. But it's not just that. It is to get a hold of you in your housing and whole societies in their housing and to reshape that as a collective decision-making space that has built-in sensor networks that can activate various frequencies, including acoustic, including photonic, the optogenetic activation, and of course the surveillance. And a lot of people talk about the surveillance. So in this larger context, I do want to just revisit Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen and their Flow Global, because we did that multi-section discussion. Now, Adam Newman wasn't just about WeWork. He was also, they were moving into real estate. And one of the clips that there was a conversation with Newman and Andreessen that was from about a year or so ago. And in one of the clips, he's pitching his new model. And the new model is you will be a renter, but you will have the opportunity to earn a certain percentage of equity in your housing. All right. And that's these new creative models that they're talking about. And if you understand that, so a lot of these new developments are going to be multi-use, mixed use development. Now, in theory, I'm not against that. Like I in my heart, I like a walkable community that has things I want, that I can walk to the library, or I can get a bagel, or, I can buy some flowers, or I could walk, or I could ride my bike. I even like those things, right? Even though they're quintessentially Agenda 21, like people would call that. But ultimately, like within the stack and pack, that's all going to be happening within spatial computing. So everything you do in it is part of the game board, right? The cities are going to become the game board. And it's going to be harder to retrofit older cities. So I'm not sure exactly how they're going to navigate that. But like the new infill housing, that's definitely going to be smarted up. And if you're supposed to earn equity, like how are you going to earn that equity? Well, in my opinion, I think that's where the community currencies are going to come in, right? And so if you think about it, there's a lot of interest in the impact finance space around housing, right? Especially affordable housing or housing for low income populations or vulnerable populations. So there's a huge amount of housing that's going to be dedicated to affordable housing or housing first. Okay. I think that's going to be part of it. And this ties into the fact that Flow Global evidently is doing a $300 million 20-acre deal in Miami where they're replacing a tent city. Okay. So in my mind, I remember that a lot of the pay for success finance deals are around housing. And so when I first started doing my research, I realized after about a couple years that the teachers were not prepared to understand what I was trying to explain to them, but that the same playbook of data-driven management, cybernetic governance, was going to be applied to different populations. So it wasn't just poor kids in urban schools. It was also people in addiction, unhoused people, the elderly, trans people, foster care people, all of that. The same playbook was going to be used across. And so I reached out to Sherry Honkala with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, PPERC, and we kind of worked together for a while, until the lockdown stuff happened. But that was all about, and again, the Vatican was involved with that. That was Sister Mary Scullion and Project Home working with Goldman Sachs and all of the impact investors to push housing first. And the housing first model really came to fruition a lot out of Utah. So again, that goes back to the whole gaming, right? Virtual environment and gaming. Again, I don't have anything against people's right to have housing, But we need for these populations to understand that their housing will very likely be smart, will be blockchained, and that their behavior in community will be linked to tokenization, like tokenized reward systems, and that those tokens then are signals in the social computation infrastructure. And so I don't even know. I was exchanging some text with someone tonight. I'm like, where do you even start on this learning curve to explain to people, right? Like why they should be concerned? Because there's at least like 6 different units of study that you need before you can actually grok like the potential problems. And again, I just want to emphasize, even though I understand now that left, right are these polarities that are running the agenda, I still, in my heart, lean into the ideas around that people should have their basic needs met, that there is enough in the world that we should be able to meet people's basic needs. And the deprivation of those needs is what makes these communities pawns in this larger game. So I'm not against housing for people, but I don't want them to be forced to be put on blockchain and live in the ant computer and earn community currency credits to do that, right? So if you imagine that these mixed use developments, because the narrative is again, we're done with bad capitalism. Crony capitalism. We're done with crony capitalism. That's what you'll tell the libertarians. And then you're like, oh, we're done with the bad repressive capitalism. That's what you'll tell the liberal leftists. Now we're going to do commoning, right? We're going to do everything cooperative. And the cooperative is the eusocial insects, right? And, Philly has cooperative housing downtown. I'm not in theory against the idea of cooperative housing, but I don't think they're going to be straight up with you and say, this cooperative housing is going to be enmeshed in a computational interface that may involve you renting your brainwave cycles, while you sleep for some collective unconscious project. I don't think they're going to tell people that. They're just going to say, hey, cooperatives are good. Why don't we just do cooperatives now? Like, remember that now we realized, I can just see it now in a couple of years. We realized Blackstone shouldn't control all the housing. We should do it cooperatively. And then you've got the tokenization and the choice architecture. And then that's where the flow global would fit in. Oh, you don't own it, but you could earn some equity by doing your part in the collaborative effort, right? In the hive. And they don't want you in the hive because they want you to be neutered and docile and dumb. They want you in the hive so they can track your choices, that they can harness your imagination and your creativity. I suspect they're probably going to have lots of things in the hive about like dance classes, right? I remember watching the movie Don't Worry, Darling, which came out a couple years ago, and it was about a woman who was essentially trapped in her real body, and she was in a virtual world. She didn't know she was. Her boyfriend had trapped her in this virtual world, and it was sort of like mid-century modern 1960s, where all the women stayed at home, Stepford Wives-likes, and the men went out to work. Only the men left the metaverse and were in the real world, and then the women were all body snatched, but they were projected into this thing, and they all had to do ballet. And the ballet is the fascia, right? And so for her and this other woman, it started to glitch out, and she started to realize what was actually happening. But the ballet was really important, the dance. So yeah, there's going to be exercise gyms in there. There's going to be some smart uniforms you can wear. Why are all the charter schools being embedded in these real estate deals, right? Well, yeah, you could say it's about leveraging tax credit financing and schemes and municipal bond programs and undercutting public schools and all of those things, which would be accurate. But if you've been paying attention to what I've been saying about like using children as channels to the field, using children's imaginations towards this problem solving stuff, then it makes perfect sense that you're going to have some sort of amazing Montessori forest school in the middle of your mixed use smart city, right? That's what you would do. I mean, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying I agree with any of it. But if you follow the through line of the logic, it makes sense that you would have a charter school, that you would have a gym, that gym would be linked to outcomes, health outcomes, wellness outcomes, right? All the stuff that all the people are yelling about in the health freedom community. We don't want big pharma. We don't want this. We want wellness. We want people to exercise. We want people to eat good food. Well, yeah, I bet that there's going to be a community garden there, and there's probably going to be a token system there where you can earn some community currency doing that. And again, I'm not against community gardens. I was a member of a community garden. I like them. I don't want them tied to some behavioral currency system that's going to be computation. I don't want that. But it seems to me, if you understand the logic of a smart city as a knowledge city, and I think at one point Julianne did talk a little bit about cognitive cities, the cognitive city is the computational module. Like, why do they need mega regions? Why do they need, like, I remember seeing reports from the US military talking about like super mega cities, right? And that how would they manage warfare in the super mega cities? Well, why do we even have a super mega city? It's because it's computing architecture. It's not because people want to live in a super mega city. And it's not because the world is going to end if we don't move into super mega cities. And it's not just because the rich people want to control all the wild land and push us all into the city. Like, maybe it's some of those things, but ultimately the super mega city is the computing infrastructure. And we need to start thinking about it like that. So yeah, but the people in the military aren't asking, why are we having super mega cities, super mega city regions? They just accept it at face value, like, oh, that's the evolution. That's what we move to. So yeah, Adam Newman and Flo, they're talking about this $300 million deal to create this new mixed-use development in Miami. Have to understand it as blockchain. The blockchain, I would say you have to understand that as community currency. All you guys, big Catherine Austin Fitts fans, and all you guys with your social currency, you need to understand that Bernard Lietaer and Galila Benartzi of Bancor and their sidekicks, Charles Eisenstein and his philosopher king, Bobby Kennedy, are all about this, right? How are they going to run the interdimensional and computer without the community currency tokens in the smart environments? They're going to get you in there. Bobby Kennedy's already said that he wants to have like decentralized free market energy systems, right? And Holochain, the people who were at the event with Eisenstein and Michaela Uluru and John Rogers, you know, they're already piloting the exercise bike cycles, you know, so like when you can't do your solar, you guys will all do your exercise bikes, you know. It's a little ridiculous when you think about it, like, but it's all about how you tell the stories, right? And if you can get people's consciousness trapped into a certain team, they're not going to be able to see anything else. They're just going to be able to repeat, you'll own nothing and be happy. You'll own nothing and be happy. Klaus Schwab is bad. Yuval Harari is bad. Bill Gates is bad. And you'll be there and you won't get to the why. You won't ever get to the why. You'll just stop because your brain has been cut off, which has happened to lots and lots of people. So I will just say, you know, I did a really long write-up on my blog when I was still doing more writing about refugees. The refugee camps are the pilots for this. And the refugee camp equivalency in the domestic United States are the tiny house tent cities for homeless people. And a lot of those are affiliated with megachurches, right? So all you guys out there who are very faith-based centered people, I'm telling you right now that your answer to central bank digital currency is going to be a church currency, right? And there was a whole write-up about it in the Idaho Libertarians years ago saying, like, we need to get out from under the bank and the government and have our own church money. Yep. Because guess what? If you can run it with the churches, then you can blockchain spirituality. And when I started writing about blockchaining spirituality, I didn't understand it in terms of the power of the connection to creation through your soul, through your soul connection to the field of divine creation and how important that was. So if you don't think that the One World Religion program is coming for the megachurch near you to run the social services deals that will be incentivized by Pay for Success Finance with the government, with these great public-private partnerships, you're not paying attention because they are. That's what Peter Drucker was about, was setting all of this stuff up. He was the one who was setting up the megachurch movement. And they're going to run the tiny houses for the vulnerable people and the immigrants and whomever. And it's going to be based off of the refugee programs in these camps. And, you know, Leo had done some really good work writing about Cello, which again, Charles Eisenstein was pushing with September, is these happiness, beautiful money currencies, right? To do alternative social currencies to develop local signals, because the signals are the computation. Okay, so couple more things. So I was talking about like swarm intelligence, all right? The signals, how the smart environments will be connected through frequency and light. how the artifacts that we use in the environments um, will be part of the social computation and steering people's consciousnesses. A while ago, Jason shared with me there was like a whole meta, the new meta version or the new Oculus Rifts or some sort of headset thing, where essentially you were living in a very tiny studio apartment, but the big glass windows of your apartment would turn into immersive reality portals. So you can totally see how this would fit. And then again, you could earn some equity in your rental by playing a game in your headset in your tiny studio living room, where the game that you're playing, yeah, maybe the crypto gaming that Derek Rose is promoting. Yeah, maybe you even have kids do the gaming, right? But the gaming that you're doing is actually work, and you're not really sure what's happening on the back end of the game, really, in either the real world or the immaterial world. And I think a picture a megacity region full of stack and pack housing with smart window glasses and interactive portals and what that all looks like, and then controlled by smart lighting and smart frequency, right? It's not just that they want you to be miserable, it's that they want you to be productive in the new ways that productivity will look like. And so I will just close. A while ago, my friend in India alerted to me that Gautam Adani and his company, like Adani Group, makes their money in coal, in port activities, which is also supply chain management, in energy and commodities trading. And Adani Group bought the largest slum in Mumbai. Okay. And so to me, this is a direct correlation to Adam Newman buying the land that was Miami's largest tent city, right? These guys know that the future of energy is human energy and human capital. And so one of the things I talked about early on about pay for success finance had to do with creativity and like resilience, even under perturbation. You know, if we're looking at Michael Levin and his graduate students, and they're working with the petri dishes, right, with the embryos, the frog embryos, and how they do problem solving, right, and how they share biofields and information fields, you would subject them to perturbations, to disruptions, right? And so if you imagine low income communities, vulnerable communities, whether they're domestically in the United States or they're in Mumbai or what have you, you can subject them to shocks, to economic shocks, or potentially to physical altercations. You could gin up certain kinds of disruption physically in those environments. And you could, and then you could connect people to UBI and food stamps and set them to like behavioral tokenization, like the community currencies, and getting, good behavior points and having those leveraged in some way. And the thing is, and I don't mean to stereotype, but my sense is that individuals who have to overcome lots of obstacles and ongoing trauma, they get pretty creative, right? Like, and creative quickly, right? Like they have good, like if you manage to keep yourself afloat in very difficult circumstances, you've got resilience and you've got good problem solving skills, right? And you've got good instincts. You've refined that. And so those are going to be people who are going to play the game well. And, that's something I've noticed in Neil Stephenson's books, The Baroque Cycle. They have like the vagabond, like the mudlarking kids, the scrappy kids who have to figure stuff out or they're going to go hungry and then they're not going to make it, right? They're creative problem solvers. And that's what I realized when I was, connecting and working with PPERC, the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, is that like I have a certain skill, right? And my skill is sitting behind a computer and mapping things out and seeing patterns and then telling you about things. But in the day-to-day stuff, it's not going to be particularly helpful. And it's the people who know how to live on the street, like when things get really difficult, like that's the skill base that is necessary. And that wasn't my skill base. And I could see and respect that. So if you imagine that the pay for success finance and the token engineering linked to pay for success finance and the architecture of the housing social impact bonds are all interconnected, you've got people in smart housing with this housing first model that are some of the most creative people there are, even though on the surface, they're not like credentialed, right? I mean, they're innovative thinkers and intuitive thinkers, but they're not they're non-typical. So you don't actually have to pay them like you pay the professionals. You just do it basically like with this these UBI tokens. And I think that's the basis of the social gaming, of the socio-technical computation, is to, on the first wave, use the social impact bonds and the token engineering and the smart housing on these vulnerable populations. And in some ways, I think the social impact bonds are geared to certain subsets. So you'll like have housing for veterans. You'll have housing for the elderly. You'll have housing for trans youth. You'll have housing for people in addiction. Like that's where the San Patrignano model fits in, guys. Like that's where Bobby is. Like he's right with, you think that he's not going to set up some public-private partnership with community currency for his organic farming rehab centers? That's exactly what this is, because the token transfers are going to be interdimensional, in my opinion. Like we'll see. I could be wrong, but I mean, my intuition is pretty good. Like he's not going to be president, but he might very well be the social impact housing czar, mental health czar, addiction treatment czar, and use his AA Jungian analysis program to get people into immersive reality, smart gaming, you know, and use their information fields towards these collective problem solving things. So anyway, I guess that's mostly just what I wanted to say. But again, this is my life, figuring out real estate, such as it is, in my own small way, realizing the implications of choice architecture and data aggregation and the weird permanence of data aggregation, what it's going to mean once my house gets listed on the market, and where that's going to go forever and ever. The automation of the real estate industry and the fact that most realtors who are really good at one game, which is selling real estate in their locale, have no idea how many games, like they're embedded within many, many, many bigger games. And then the question is like, is it even worth it to try to explain it to them? Or do we just like sort of let the chips fall where they may? And that even though the shift for these creative solutions around real estate are probably going to involve blockchain and Web3, there is also this very important concept of flow group in Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen of smart housing, where your behavior lets you earn some equity in the rental. And again, I think they need you invested in the game. I think part of that, having you invested, isn't just simply your commitment to playing the game of life in their mixed use development smart environments, but there may also be some aspect of like quantum entanglement. So I guess that's mostly it. I do see there's someone saying, okay, let's say the world does go this direction. What is the purpose of humans since we won't be needed? And I will just assume that this person hasn't actually been listening to my recent talks in the last 6 months, because for those maybe who aren't clued in my opinion, and again, this is an opinion, it's a hypothesis, and it may or may not prove to be correct, but the singularity is not about AI attaining consciousness. It is about us agreeing to become an extension of the machine consciousness. Because the machines, the engineered machines, will never have access to the sacred field of creation. Like, however you understand God, and I know different people will pop in and they have very strong ideas about their preferred representation of that. And you know, you are definitely entitled to that. I would say at the same time, I am not an advocate of any one world religion, even if it's the one that you like the best. And that as long as we are authentic to ourselves and our understanding of that, that is valued. And I wouldn't want to see a world where there was only one way to worship God. But that connection is vitally important, because the machines don't have that. They don't have a soul. They'll never have a soul. Okay. And we are a part of the whole, and we become embodied. We come here, as it's like Bentov says, and I really like this idea, we're information organizers. I've been organizing a ton of information lately. And then when our time is up, our lived experience, the lessons we've learned, how we put things together goes to be shared. It is kind of the collective mind in a sense, but it's not something that's happening with nanoparticles or man-made frequencies. And so that is part of the computation, and also not just our knowing, our cognitive access to that field, but a lot of the field is the intuitive knowledge, the unconscious knowledge. That's why Melanie Swan would like to have us on blockchain and to sell our unused, air quotes, brainwave cycles for processing. Because it's not that it's unused, it's that if you look at what Talhar Desjardins has said, what Vladimir Vernadsky said, is that human evolution is not done and we're evolving towards a global thought form. I don't necessarily buy that this is a foregone conclusion, but in that concept towards an omega point, or Talhar Desjardins called it Christogenesis, is that we become part of this thought field. And I think that's what it's driving. But the thought field isn't just to be a thought field, it is to be a quantum computation, some kind of problem solving, some sort of information processing system. We are meant to be parallel processing nodes. So as exquisite as the human biology is, as exquisite as our imagination is, as exquisite as our heart fields can be, there is something out there, and my placeholder is the interdimensional biofilm, that imagines that as little ants can be coordinated with social cues, with pheromones, and again, these community currencies, these tokens are going to be those pheromones. Individual ants that have a relatively simple consciousness can create amazing architectures and solve challenging problems. Same with termites, same with hive bees. They can be coordinated at scale. So if that can be accomplished with insects, what could be accomplished with humans that have, as Michael Levin would say, like a much bigger light cone of problems, goal-oriented behaviors than insects, and that have a soul connection to this vast information field, in my opinion, of all the information that ever is or was or is out there, and it's being curated through our biology into a particular slice of reality at a given time. Which is why I think I had sort of a back and forth with somebody about like the outside. My understanding is the information field is the outside, and that I'm more and more inclined into nonlinear time. Although our biology orders things in a certain way so that it seems linear, like our biology and our consciousness curates a story so that it makes sense to us in this presentation. So we're actually super important. We're actually and I'm not saying that we're necessarily more important than the other relatives on the planet. I think the interconnectedness of all of us is super important. And I think that's why they want to blockchain nature. And that's why everything wants to become quantum entangled. But I think that that's a pretty good explanation of what's happening beyond simply they want to kill us all, which isn't logical based on why they would be building all of this, or that they just want to make us miserable puppets and erase our individuality. No, they want to harness your individuality, in my opinion. So anyway, yeah. I see Hanging Thief is talking about the geoengineering and geomagnetic cloud mines. And I do, like, a while back, and Hanging Thief, if you can find it, like, I remember seeing an article that I can't find anymore that was talking about the use of geoengineering at special events that had, like, if there was a special event, say a big political event, that there was going to be a lot of Wi-Fi coverage or something, that they would do geoengineering to enhance the signal carrying system. And I thought that really made a lot of sense. And not just for political events where you're using Wi-Fi or signal things, but other kinds of signal transmission. And they've been doing a lot of that in Philly lately, definitely. I'm sure in other places as well. It is managing electromagnetism. And I do have to get back to, I have to spend a little time. I got sidetracked today, but this the musical, whatever the new pandemic musical, The Great Awakening. I finally saw the trailer, and oh my goodness, it's all signal intelligence and photonics and parallel processing and magnets, like the first one. Has magnets prominently featured and light. Yeah, these guys, oh, it's quite something. So I need to do a breakout of that. And Steffers, we were going back and forth sharing a lot of good information on that one. So anyway, hopefully you got something out of that. I don't really know if you can convey to your realtor friends. I'm sure most people who eventually watch this will know a couple of realtors. And I don't really know where you start with someone who doesn't know any of this, but I think even at the baseline of automating the profession, and then maybe telling them that they need to actually start to think about what token engineering means for real estate. Because and how the housing markets are going to be interwoven with the social impact bonds and the housing first. Because I would say that's one of my big frustrations with the so-called health resistance movement or whatever, is that for the most part, people didn't really care about the poor. Like I was one of the main people who was talking about, the impact. Like, yeah, you're talking about central bank digital currency, but they're already doing models of food stamps on blockchain, right? Like here, you're selling your crypto BS, but I'm like, but like the state of Illinois is doing prototype programs where they're blockchaining food stamps. Do you think that's okay? And I think largely because of the demographics of the resistance, people really didn't give a shit about poor people, even though those are the test subjects, whether it's the domestic poor or the poor of the global south. And then they've been figuring out how to problem solve around it for a lot longer. So we actually should start paying attention. And the housing situation, the architecture, the smart housing as it pertains to refugees and tiny house populations. And I would say for people of faith, and not just Christians, but y'all are going to be involved in offering these social welfare services. Totally. I mean, in like JEVS, the Jewish Educational Vocational System, totally about like, because often the housing is linked to workforce development. So start asking those questions about like supportive housing and blockchain and these social currency tokens and equity and cooperatives. Because I know there was a woman that I used to, coordinate with for a while who was really sort of an expert in cooperatives, but saw that there was a really predatory insinuation of social impact finance into that space of cooperatives, which at the surface seemed good, right? Because as a cooperative, it's more individuals being in control of resources than top down, right? But the social impact investors were very interested in getting their influence into the cooperative movement. And because I think that the cooperatives are definitely connected to the youth social tendencies. So anyway, thanks guys. Enjoy your weekend. All right. And wish me luck on my house. All right. Bye.